2024. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're doing well on this long weekend. I'm going to be your host tonight, Dana Durnford. I hope you're doing well. You can call in. We're doing a special show tonight on the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which is going to sunset in 4 days. I think the title says 5. My apologies. And this is to compensate people exposed during the Manhattan Project, for instance. It's a very long time ago. If you worked at Hanford for a single 8-hour shift, you're protected for the rest of your life. All you got to do is prove you're there for 8-hour shift. You don't have to prove you got injured by radiation. You just had to work there for 8 hours and you're entitled to a pension. Or a payout or health care even included. And so, why is the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act important? And what are the issues from the exposure that we would expect? So the typical mouthpiece for the industry will talk about cancer. Cancer. And they'll downplay that till they say, oh, well, he smoked cigarettes when he was young, or she drank alcohol, or their parents smoked in the house while they were there. They'll come up with all kinds of excuses to deny you, but the truth is it's really dangerous. It's the most toxic thing that exists. And I'm going to explain it in 500 studies or less. I'm going to use 500 academic studies, just like a ticker tape, and so you can see what the academics are studying. And then you can extrapolate now on your own the validity of the harm from radioactive fallout, because they spent an enormous amount of money doing studies, and a lot of those were to mitigate it, but nevertheless they've done the study because it affects this. And 500 facets is just a small percentage of the studies you need to see if you understand the bigger picture, like of radiation emissions. So, one of the ways I got to explain that tonight was in a poll. Was detonating 1,000 nuclear weapons. These are nuclear weapons. Some of these were equal to 1,000 Hiroshimas, or Nagasaki rather, which is a plutonium bomb. And Hiroshima was a uranium bomb. And we'll start off with why plutonium is important in this equation. Have the same radioactive fallout as a nuclear war. Well, it's much like 1,000 nuclear weapons that, let's use the Americans for an example, detonated on their own citizens, including Christmas Island, the Marshall Islands, etc., etc. I think we'll just go ahead and do that. So the poll tonight was detonating 1,000 nuclear weapons designated a test actually had the same radioactive fallout as a nuclear war. This was a nuclear war. And just one of their bombs, like the Castle Bravo, was actually a nuclear war. And it takes me a few minutes to get up to speed. My apologies. I've been hard at it all weekend. I haven't stopped Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and today. That was lights we put on the trailer yesterday in the rain. That's
we are today, in the water.
A few hours ago, actually. Okay, got one running. I got the other one running. Just starting them. That was music to the ears, I can assure you. It's been a long weekend. I worked on a trailer all weekend. Put winches on it, lights all around it, backup lights on it, stuff like that, a battery on it. I welded the winch on it. That way no one can steal it. I'll show you a bunch of that. We have a montage of videos and pictures at the end of the night. we're going to jump right into the show. We're going to talk about the last show for a second. So my video was 1 minute last night, or Thursday's video. I had one view. That was nice of them. 11 hours later, I had 118 views. I think we had 30 likes or something. Next to nothing. The YouTube's got me censored like I don't even exist. So at 11 hours, it was still 1 hour, 27 minutes and 24 seconds. My videos always get longer, so it's important to watch it in the first 10 hours. Time is running out for the American victims of the nuclear tests, and Congress must do what's right. There's a lot of different, but not like over the last couple of months, basically, this showed up, not a lot of times, but we covered it several times a week anyway. And so apparently it's going to run out, expires, sunsets on June 7th. And so the House of Representatives is coming right down to the wire, which is... Now there's... Some people are complaining that it's costing a lot of money, right? To pay the victims for restitution. They have a justice system based upon restitution, but when it comes to nuclear, there is no restitution for some reason. And Congress don't have the authority to make it illegal to poison you. Only the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and if they did, the next administration could overturn it and would. So let's go back to Oppenheimer. Now I've become deaf. I'll catch the volume as it goes live here.
We knew the world would not be the same.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was going to be that live.
Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
They stop feeling that way one or another. That feeling should never go away. That's why we wanted the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. We're probably going to have to go to the big screen, the big shot screen. I only got in the house about 3 hours ago. We're getting there, though. We're good to go. A few little issues, we'll iron them out this week. Because we're looking for damage from radiation is what we're doing. That's why we're out on the boat in the first place. We're going to show you 500 studies of why I'm out on the boat looking for damage and why the Radiation Compensation Act is so important to those that are able to get it. And for goodness sakes, don't spend it on radiation in the hospital to finish yourself off with. Big mistake. Okay, so each of these lines, this was a rude, not a very well, even still, this is all the nuclear testing for a couple of years, and which was a big period. At each line you see in there across the country, the United States, is considered 2 bombs for each line. And so they're very, 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 very conservative is what you're seeing. Right, they're very, very, very conservative. I think I'm supposed to be over in this one over here. So don't forget to click around a little tiny bit. Appreciate it. Get out, show, Dana. Stop fooling around, pandering for subscribers like a pathetic YouTuber. No, I know. I can't afford to stream on the big shot sites for $12,000 a year, right? They're just going to censor me anyway. Okay, so everybody in the country got sick from radiation, according to this one. This is not a very accurate depiction, though. Let me give you an accurate depiction, because we're about to jump into the studies. We got 500 studies to flash through so that the world can see how radiation actually works. When they say scientists are on the fence about this or fence about that, that's simply not true. They actually studied the fence too. That's how anal these people actually are. This is a radioactive fallout map based on 31 days from the French government, no less, the International Radiation Safety. So the radioactive fallout covered the whole planet from Fukushima in just 20 days. But by 30 days, hang on, we'll get there. Let me try this again. Okay, here we go. So these are the studies. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to show you so many studies where they studied radiation, but some of them are really important to help articulate it. But what you're going to end up seeing at the 500, if we can actually get through the 500 studies, I'm pretty good at some, but I don't know if I can get through 500, but we're going to try. It's such an important story. We're going to talk about a lot of things along the way of radioactive fallout, the Manhattan Project included. Okay, so comparative skeletal distributions of americium plutonium in man, monkey, and baboon. Well, the skeletal contamination from plutonium is typically the biggest killer. I'll show you some studies about that. The distribution retention of plutonium, americium, uranium in mice. So they've studied monkeys, baboons, humans, mice. The influence of age, time exposure to 239 plutonium, and distribution, retention. Once the sequester is in your bones, it's never going to come out of your bones. It's a skeletal seeker, right? Like strontium-90, for instance. Tumor induction in beagle dogs. They really got a hate on for beagle dogs, I noticed. Comparison of internal emitter radiobiology in animals and humans. It'll make sense to you coming up. So what I'm trying to show you is they studied so much for any academic to say they're on a fence about the damage from radiation. And it also quantifies why the linear null threshold is so important. Relative radiosensitivity of bone tumor inductions among the beagles is a function of age at injections of plutonium-239. Review of plutonium effects in beagle dogs. Relative effectiveness of 239 plutonium, it's 100% die. 100%. If they're allowed to live out their life without sacrificing them early, this is what they call it, they usually get 3 tumors. I'll show you them right away. And other internal emitters from bone cancers, you can go read Dr. Raymond Gilmedy from Loveless Respiratory Research Institute. It was a military or Navy institution. He's got 95 studies on beagle dogs and beagle puppies. It kills everything. So, yeah, this is another one of the Loveless Respiratory Research Institute. So they got 144 beagle dogs, rather this one here, 144 beagle dogs. And we'll get to the curium, which is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods. But out of the 144 beagle dogs and beagle puppies, tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver occur beginning about 3 years after exposures. And the bone tumors found in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death. And lung tumors found in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death. And liver tumors found in 20 dogs, but were the cause of death in only 2 dogs, but occurred later than the tumors in the bones and lungs. So if you live long enough, you got 3 tumors. So rolling the dice doesn't work anymore. Tumors in these 3 organs often occur in the same animals and were competing causes of death. These findings in dogs suggest that similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally. So all the 144 beagle dogs died of multiple tumors. And the bone tumors in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death, the skeletal tumors, right? But other studies, well, for instance, the curium isotope, forget that, the curium isotope are the major byproducts in the radiated nuclear fuel rod, and it comprises a significant fraction, not just of alpha emitting, but they're the biggest byproduct in the radiated fuel rods. Just because they're betas, and there's a lot of betas, or alpha, there's a lot of alphas, but they're the biggest byproduct. So in other words, there's more curium isotopes than the iodines or the cesium productions. And so for iodine-131, for every iodine-131 produced, there's 10 times more 132, 30 times more 133, 31 times more iodine-129. And 132, 133 are 9 times more effective at ionizing and radiating the thyroid gland, which also means, radioactive hormones, than the 131, which is incredibly effective. And then the 137 cesium, after 1,000 days in like a nuclear meltdown, the typical ratio is going to be 100-to-1 of strontium-90 after the first 1,000 days, and that'll continue for tens of thousands of days. And strontium-90 has the same attributes as plutonium and curium. These are bone seekers. But curium, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for the plutonium. So curium being a major byproduct of radiated fuel rod, it should be the studies they're doing on the dogs instead of the plutonium, see? Okay. And the kidneys accumulate the most radioactive cesium, which is a gamma. And cesium, of course, it doesn't matter where it accumulates because it pulses energy 600 feet. So it's a curse to everything within 600 feet. It'll pulse through the neighbor's house, the other neighbor's house, the other neighbor's house, then the other neighbor's house, and radiate you in your house, okay? In your snugglies. And the highest level of any tissue inside of cows, another animal. So you got beagle dogs, you got monkeys, you got cows. And what it was discovered, though, was that the human kidneys are 50 times less efficient than the animal kidneys at removing the plutonium, for instance. So you're 50 times more likely to die than the dog was, and all the dog died in all the studies of multiple tumors. But what happens is when you got all these tumors going on in your body, your immune system is compromised. So now you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign. And I mean, people were lulled into complacency. They're up to doing ballet, playing ballerinas with a nuclear bomb in the background. That's trendy. See that? That's over the top stuff. I apologize. I got a drink. And I'm a slurper, so I'll make a bit of noise. And it was really trendy back in those days to get a bomb shelter because you really did need a bomb shelter because there was a nuclear war going on. But people just wouldn't acknowledge it. Oh, well, no, that's their bomb. It doesn't matter whose bomb it is. The radioactive fallout is the same. And there's no such thing as downwind. The whole planet is downwind in about 31 days. Everything. Who cares about the long-term effects? Check out this tent. I got no idea why that was there. My apologies. This was a accumulation of 14-day fallout dose pattern from a hypothetical attack on the United States, which was the CIA or something, right? So there was all of these models of the radioactive fallout, and I can show you them for days, but I can show you the ones where they actually quantified it with the studies on the other end, right? And so it's much worse than anything they're going to show you. And so when they say no shelter required, the wind doesn't just blow one direction, right? The next day it blows another direction. The day after it blows it back this way. Imagine a snowstorm that, I don't know how you would do, like a laser where one side is no snow and you see it all the time. It just doesn't work that way, right? And so back in the day when they were encouraging people to build these things, You should have been down there. They had nuclear war going on every year for years and years and years. We just sent our response to your sanctioned threats. Ignore that. That doesn't matter. Okay, so let's get back into the studies. What was ringing my bell there? I know I butchered the audio at the beginning. My apologies to everybody. Out of practice. Too busted up. I was working in the rain for 3 days to pull this off. Every day I just went out and worked in the rain. We got 15 millimeters tomorrow, so. But I almost got the shelter on the boat so I can handle any kind of wind. Because if I get out there and get caught in the wind, I'm going to tear things up, right? And I sewed up. I'll show you the pictures coming up. Radiation and fruits from the Northern Marshall Islands. 67 nuclear tests in the Republic of the Marshall Islands between 1946 and 58. And the damage, radioactive fallout and testing power contaminated a huge swath of land. This 2019 study. It's over 1 million square kilometers are uninhabitable today. Try wrapping your mind around that. It's because it's hard to comprehend for the average person. I totally understand it, but we need to comprehend the significance of it. And just give me a second here. So you got over 1 million square kilometers in the Marshall Islands. The habitability of the affected atolls, which means it's a nuclear wasteland. See, it's because it's a nuclear wasteland. I don't know where I put it to. I probably put it. I know. Hang on. Just one second. My apologies. I have to come back looking for it after. Just keep going. And so, in the military, we've covered a lot of it over the years. They were put in harm's way. They were used as guinea pigs too, and their loved ones would have been affected because this goes down the gene pool, and you'll see that in these studies. We're going to rock through these studies, and I'll do a bit of pandering, get everybody to make sure they remember to give me a thumbs up because the censorship. I think only a third of the people or something where it actually works. So they've studied every facet of life because of accidents, because of releases, because of the nuclear war they call testing. And when you understand what the academics are studying, it's just let me depart for 1 second. Because sometimes there's a quick way, and sometimes we're going to take both ways. And then, places close to where the bombs were set off originally were denied compensation because there's heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. In later years, there's Alzheimer's, dementia. I mean, the first studies you're going to do is, after a major nuclear accident, is look for autism and Down syndrome. So what does that tell us? That's where the big money can be on studies will go right away. So the radioactive fallout, if you're growing pharmaceutical plants in the radioactive fallout zone, then the pharmaceuticals become a nightmare, made more victims, right? So they know that the radiation, when you look at Chernobyl studies, we know that the radiation is transferred from flower to honey and pollen. And so that's why we see a lot of the bees are disappearing. A lot of the die-offs you can correlate to the nuclear worldwide radioactive fallout. In fact, they've done sex ratio studies on humans worldwide to see if there's more males than females with all the nuclear testing. Radiation contamination data collected in Italy following Chernobyl, so it travels very long distances. Agricultural countermeasures, this was another thing where they continue to grow food in nuclear wastelands simply to study the victims. Chernobyl fallout detected in the seaweed, water retention in freshwater lakes, and after Chernobyl, it closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom. And so radiation has some incredible, terrible properties. And when you look at the bigger picture of all the different facets that they studied, and how it travels from the animals to the food chain and then into the victims, aspects of environmental monitoring by the British nuclear fuel following Chernobyl, they used that to cover up the wind scale radioactive fallout harm. And then there's this incredible diversity in the fallout. It's not just going to be cesium. It's not just going to be iodines. It's going to be this wide spectrum of isotopes. And when you look at the studies of how the fallout works for major events, for instance, so that's Chernobyl, Neptunium-239 dispersal after 20 days. So when you're setting off a whole bunch of high-level nuclear bombs that are picking up millions of tons and ionizing and radiating and atomizing and aerosoling it, and that becomes radioactive particles, which normally would never come from a reactor, now is morphed into a very harmful element that has a very longevity, and once it's man-made, anthropogenic man-made with a long half-life, it no longer has the attributes of natural stuff, right? We call it man-made because it's not from the solar system. So your body attacks it. When it's in your body's going to flood it with white blood cells for the rest of your life and try to build a sarcophagus around it. Contamination in Austrian soil with cesium-137. Pregnancy outcome in Sweden after Chernobyl. Cesium and perch in the Swedish lakes. Cesium and 241 americium, 241 plutonium isotopes in the lagoons in the Baltic Seas. Chernobyl fallout. Long-term variations post-Chernobyl. So this stuff lives forever in the human experience. It'll be here long after everybody currently alive or dead. This stuff will still be hanging out doing harm. And you can't destroy it in incinerators or something like that. And they do burn a lot. All nuclear power plants, for instance, have incinerators. Thyroid radiation doses in Britain are rising from Chernobyl. Of course, thyroid, you got radioactive hormones for the rest of your life. The issues now are just the whole textbook, the entire medical textbook, because you got radioactive hormones being distributed throughout your bodies. Just because you haven't got thyroid cancers, thyroid tumors, that doesn't mean you ain't in a whole lot of trouble. That's the problem. And the doctors in the 50s and 60s described it as a biological weapon, right? Thyroid radiation doses in the British. So when you get big doses in the thyroid, then the skeleton is going to be incredibly radioactive, which means now you're producing radioactive stem cells, especially for young people, right? And because there's a latency, right? Because even the smallest amount, the body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. And so if you've got a single anthropogenic man-made atom in your body attacks it for the next 50 years. If that's the only one in your body, it attacks it with the rest of your life with white blood cells. So you have less oxygen, you become a little bit, lethargic because your body's under siege your whole life. It's like you got a flu your entire life, for instance. But you don't understand it, right? You can't perceive it. and eventually builds a tumor around it. But if you get a lot of it in your body's overwhelmed with white blood cells. They call that leukemia. Uptake of radionuclides by plants, so animals and insects and birds are all susceptible, see? There's nothing on the planet with an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. It's a foreign invader. Your body treats it as a foreign invader and attacks it for the rest of life. So there is a serious cause and effect going on. It's permanent, and you're in a fight of your life. Now, with as little as 50 atoms, anthropogenic man-made atoms, in your diet for a while, you have permanent lesions to your organs. Permanent lesions. So there's all kinds of other adverse side effects from that because your immune system is compromised and you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless, right? And so this is magnified dramatically in the insects, the birds, the mammals, the animals. And this is why we're studying the species. I'll take you right, and so you can stay around for the end of the show because I'll be showing pictures and videos from the day. If you're trying to, and this will give you an insight of why I'm doing the research, why we've done so many years of this type of research. It's a terrible story, right? It's just a heartbreaking story. How it decimates the ecosystem and breaks the food chain in just endless places. And that cascades to emaciated whales, emaciated birds, emaciated seals, emaciated sea lions. It's shocking, really. Like every facet of the story, it's a horror story. Hollywood can never cook up a story. So they know that the radiation uptake by plants, so they can postulate a lot of things just from that knowledge alone, see? That changes in the thyroid cancer incidences in Scotland post-Chernobyl. So when you look at the nuclear testing, the studies back then, it was wide open because this was a new field, right? But now it's an old field. They're still at it hardcore. And so thyroid means radioactive hormones. It means your pituitary glands, all your glands are going to become saturated with radioactive hormones. This is unprecedented. There is no textbook on this stuff. It's an extinction event. If you never had a nuclear accident, ever, if you've never done no nuclear testing, ever, all the emissions from the fuel pools, which are still splitting atoms, there's 1,000 fuel pools plus worldwide, they're all hemorrhaging the full range into the ecosystem because there's no containment, right? Radiocesium in aquatic invertebrates. So they study so many of these facets, if they can find them. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportions at birth, where so you're looking for more males and females, which means less population if it's true, right? And it is true, of course. And they've done studies like this on the entire population of humans worldwide after the nuclear testing ban. But this is going to be magnified dramatically in the species. So if you see a discrepancy, you see more males and females from these studies shown to harm, then it's going to be dramatic in the species because they're way more vulnerable. The propagation of Chernobyl impulse through the air, grass, and they like using 131 iodines to confuse the population. When they look it up, they see the 8-day half-life. And they don't bother telling them it's not a half of a half, it's half of 10. There's 10 half-lives. And this is hypothetical of what they're saying, right? They can't quantify their assertions that it's going to be 10. It could be 12, 14 half-lives. To the air, grass, animal milk pathway. So they're very aware of how the radiation, sexual dysfunctions at Chernobyl, radioactivity in the breast milk after Chernobyl, transport of cesium and iodine from air to the cows. They know how they know the venues this stuff is traveling in. Determination of cesium in the water system in pre-alpine lakes. Sure, that's in France. Analysis of radioactivity levels in soil and crops, southern Italy after Chernobyl. Anthropogenic cesium in an atmospheric aerosol in Slovakia. So they studied every facet is what I'm trying to show you. So they know, right? They can predict almost to a letter how many heart and liver and lung and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid and adrenaline, how much Alzheimer's and dementia and autism, diabetes and Down syndrome and schizophrenia, how many per population is going to be. That's why they don't have a compensation exposure act for people who live close to where the weapons go, because everybody got heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, and what they'll see is the whole population is sick of something or another. And that's like, owie, you cut my fucking finger. They're sick shit, right? They're sick. And they're liquidating their loved ones are liquidating their assets because the government refuses to acknowledge them because of the horror. Because a lot of the people that done it to them are still alive and they don't want to be held accountable, right? They should. These are serial killers, is the best way to describe the people that done it. They didn't need to set off 1,000 bombs. Oh, let's try another one over right there, Georgie. We got a big budget this year. Oh, that's a pretty looking island out there. Imagine going out to the most beautiful archipelagos, just paradises, actual paradises. You would have been proud to shipwreck on them. You were like, well, at least I shipwrecked here. It's paradise, right? Would have friggin' nuked it and blew it up and atomized and aerosol some of it. They disintegrated islands to get their jollies, right? And they went out there because they knew the radioactive fallout was bad. And so one radioactive fallout is bad, the other one's not. It doesn't work that way, right? Let's keep it rolling here. I'm just trying to be realistic about this equation. We're 5 days away from the sunset. And I don't see any dissenting voices whatsoever. I just see the apologists out there. Yeah, we don't need it. It's too much money. We need it more. Put it towards nuclear plants, which are disease factories, right? The fuel pools, that's nuclear plants are disease factories. They're hemorrhaging radiation 24 hours a day. Once they take the first one out of the reactor and put it in a pool, there's no containment. Still splitting the same atoms needed for millions of homes and businesses. And all of them, except for a few, are surrounded by farms. It's hemorrhaging radiation surrounded by farms. That ain't going to work out too good. They got everybody hoodwinked. But they're just going to destroy their own future, everybody else's. And the current generation are what they call the entitled, as far as I can tell. They're the entitled lot. Evidence for a sustained excess in females in Colombia. Oh, the trend went backwards. Transfer of radionuclides and dose assessments to ants and anthills. And these incredible studies. But what I'm looking for, I'm looking for spiders today. I didn't see no spiders because we had fog here today. And so the dew will show up in the spider webs. So you like to check the spider webs to see what's in the area. I'll show you videos and pictures come up. Studies of iodine, cesium in milk, meat, and vegetable in northeast Scotland. And so if you didn't stop people from consuming it, you didn't stop them from breathing the air, then they all got irradiated, right? You got to stop them from breathing the air. That's the trick. Don't drink any water. Don't eat any food locally or from the other side of the planet. Calculation of individual effective dose equivalent, Italy following. So, to go from to contaminate France, contaminate Italy, Romania. Well, Ukraine is up here, right? But everything gets contaminated. For it to get all the way down to Britain, which is way over there, for them to get down to Britain, they got to contaminate everything else on the way. Scale to assess nuclear incidents need revision. Well, new scientists are such scumbags. Anyway, right? They're just terrible what they've got, the lies they've told. There is no agricultural countermeasures. 137 exposures of moose in Norway. Radioactive cesium contents of meat in Italy after Chernobyl, and their changes during the cooking process. And a lot of these studies were meant to try to quantify that, if you cook the food, that'll get rid of the radiation, but it actually doesn't work that way. It's one of the most absurd suggestions. Another one's where they say that you can put potassium in the farmer fields, and that way it won't suck up the cesium. Well, let's say it did work that way, which it doesn't. What about the uranium, the plutonium, the curium, the biggest byproduct of the radiative fuel rods? What about the strontium? What about the krypton, the xenons? What about the 1,000 of other fission products? And so when does the madness stop? Right, cover up after cover up after cover up for 80 years, and now we got this big hole where everybody's being poisoned all the time, and we're losing the diversity of all the species. And we're not in a position to draw a line. Transfer of cesium and tea and other foods, and all I do is I do an educational program, and I do a lot of research when I'm healthy enough. And lucky for me, this year I'm hoping to get a lot of research in. Last year we had 3 heart attacks and 7 stents put in. And I had hernia, I had kidney stones. Rough year last year. Last year was hellish. Didn't think I was going to see another year, that's for sure. Transfers of cesium in tea and other foods to man. Other foods. So when your water is radioactive, and it is, especially if you live near nuclear weapons sites back in those days, well, you cook your food in water, you wash your clothing in water, you brush your teeth with water, you drink water, you have tea all day, you make. And back in those days, it was trendy to make your own drinks, like your own concoctions for the kids and everything. And so incredible poisoning, right? Look at some of these numbers where they considered safe after nuclear accident, and then when you look at what a hot tub would have into it, it'd be like 7 million atoms. It'd be a radioactive nuclear wasteland in your hot tub when you fill it up with that radioactive water. So silver and fungi in central Italy after Chernobyl. Transfer of fallout from cesium radioisotopes in cowed food chain. So they've studied every facet of this. And that's what I'm trying to show you is, like, when they say, well, the science is not in yet, and they've been at it for 80 years. The science was in a long time ago. They didn't go out in Bikini Island and set the nuclear bombs off because they liked it out there. They went out there because of the radioactive fallout. They had contaminated the country so much, but they refused to stop doing it. Oh, I don't know if the next one will work. We better set off another nuclear bomb, which is a big deal, right? And so they needed 1,000 bombs for what reason? To set off 1,000 bombs. And all the bombs that were set off under the ground, they say they don't really count for fallout. The fastest object in space by man is a manhole cover from a nuclear test. It took the manhole cover and it sent it up in space at about 175,000 miles an hour. It's traveling way out in the stellar space right now. Everything is vented as soon as the detonation goes. It was vented at a very high speed. And then it might cook there for another 30 or 40 years if it leaves a cavern. These caverns are known to hit 400 and 500 degrees even today, 40, 50 years later. Indoor surface accumulation of radioactive particles from Chernobyl, transfers of plutonium to cow's milk. They studied everything. The rain dust from the Sahara Desert is still radioactive. The French, what they done to the French Polynesians was equal to a Nagasaki bomb a week for 12 years. Equivalent, right? But the fallout in the Marshall Islands from the Americans testing is equal to a Nagasaki bomb every day for 12 years because they use the hydrogen bombs and that out there. And they also done a lot of weird tests out there too to the victims. I hope one day they'll get included too. Radiocesium on urban surfaces in West Colombia 5 months after Chernobyl. It affects the low-level radioactive solid contamination, sterilization, and the degradation of radio-labeled wheat straw. They studied every facet that you can of the ecosystem for radiation because it's absorbed in every facet of the ecosystem. Dispersions of Fukushima radionuclides in the global atmosphere and the oceans Measuring the radiation exposure of Norwegian reindeers on their... Look at all the people in that study. That's not their first study on the reindeer either. So they're studying every facet of the ecosystem. Vertical distribution inventories of cesium in the Syrian soil, eastern Mediterranean regions. Radioactivity in breast milk and the placentia after Chernobyl. Hot particles in Finland. And you'll get that from nuclear weapons. See, all of this is just a mirror of the nuclear weapons. And they would have done these same tests for nuclear weapons. Fukushima radiation released no threat to the health, says new scientist scumbags. The role of rivers in Chernobyl deliveries, distributions, accumulations. I mean, Fukushima is brutal. You had 8 fuel pools and 4 reactors melt down. 8 fuel pools. Each fuel pool probably had 8 reactor cores in it. Because they don't have a repository anywhere, let alone in Japan. It's kept in the fuel pools, right? You're talking about massive inventories lost. Well, each reactor in Japan is worse than all nuclear meltdowns combined, for instance. Each one, not counting the fuel pools. Each of the reactors in Japan was equal to about 100 Chernobyls, because they're pure uranium, pure plutonium. Chernobyl was a new reactor, was graphite. Assessment is a small reactor compared to the Japanese. Assessment of radiation in the Croatia. Study on plutonium determined in soil from regions of Poland. So the studies are, you would want to easily, to close 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom, because it's like a banana and a potato chip, right? No, because it's very bad. The effects of radioactive pollution on the dynamics of infectious diseases in wildlife. Yeah, because it compromises the immune system, and any normal diseases they would typically fight off now become a threat. And this is post-Fukushima. You see the word bird flu tossed around heavily for the last number of years. Once the domoic acid version didn't pan out, they turned to the bird flu. The bird flu is... the immune systems are compromised because of radiation poisoning, see? Because it's bioaccumulation up the food chain. But it's not jumping to the mammals. That's the same as the domoic acid. For years and years and years, they were saying that domoic acid killed all of the whales, seals and sea lions and birds. But when the studies came back, it was always negative for domoic acid. That was just their cover story, right? It's their official narrative. But we're just digging a deep hole by using that, which is the industry's narrative. We're digging a big hole by going that way. At some point, somebody's going to have to say, okay, well, look, it's actually really harmful, and let's just deal with it. Particle mixing process is Chernobyl in the Norwegian sea sediment. So they studied every facet of all these accidents. Cesium freshwater fish in Finland, they studied everything. How many people drink tea? The majority of the population worldwide drinks tea or coffee. That's going to be incredibly radioactive. And we see all these studies. Let me get out of the Chernobyl. So, I won't even eat mushrooms. I stopped eating mushrooms 13 years ago. Plutonium under alpha emitters and mushrooms from Poland, Spain, Ukraine. It ain't just Poland, Spain, and Ukraine, folks. They're one of the worst bioaccumulators of radiation is funguses like mushrooms. Transfer of cesium-137 and strontium-90 from soil to food. These are two nasty isotopes, too. You don't want, and there's a 100-to-1 ratio now at Fukushima for cesium and strontium. There's 100 strontium-90 for every cesium-137 produced. The biggest byproduct, though, is the curium isotopes, which are 20 times worse than the plutonium. Mental disturbances in persons exposed to radiation after Chernobyl. There is real, obesity rates doubled in Japan the first year after Fukushima. And obesity rates explosion in the population is a sign of radiation brain damage. What happens? You get a lot of radiation in your body, you're producing more white blood cells than red blood cells, so you're not able to think clearly. And so it comes across as schizophrenia, it comes across as, and it is in many ways Alzheimer's and dementia. In fact, you can probably trace the explosion we're seeing now, post-Fukushima, of Alzheimer's and dementia and autism directly to Fukushima. Effectiveness of countermeasures applied in Belarus. There is no countermeasures. That's why you have exclusion zones, right? There is no countermeasures. Bladder lesions induced by long-term dose ionizing radiation in humans. So anybody living close to the nuclear weapons test areas, which was a nuclear war, it's the same radioactive fallout as a nuclear war. Pediatric thyroid cancers in children exposed to fallout. And a lot of the main medias will talk about cancer only, as if cancer is the holy grail. Cancer is just a fraction of the diseases and illnesses and autoimmune deficiencies, and everybody will eventually get the cancer from the exposures. So, like just the weapons they set up in space, one of them exploded. Not weapons, but rovers were using plutonium for a heat source, electricity source and heat source, had blown up in the upper atmosphere. And they postulated everybody on the planet had plutonium in them because of that alone, which is named after the devil, I might add, for a really good reason, because it's such an energetic. Female reproductions in areas of radiation influences. So they studied every facet. I love doing these ticker tapes because you drive 100 or 200 or 300 academic studies into the consciousness, into the collective, and then you can extrapolate on your own. You say, well, it ends up here, it ends up there, it ends up here, and there, everywhere. And we got the studies to prove it. It's everywhere. It shows up everywhere, and they studied it and found it everywhere. On the urban streets, the walls, the roofs, urban buildings, the contaminated housings, reduction of external dose. That's a sneaky thing to do. Because a lot of them you can't get money for internal studies. You can only get money for external dose studies. And we got some studies that are just, it's obviously these people make a living doing fake studies. And a good living, right? They don't have big, beautiful houses because they're not making a bunch of money doing it. Radioactive contamination of aquatic ecosystem following the Chernobyl. Contamination of an aquatic ecosystem. This is why I'm out on the boat researching all over the years so much. We had a bit of rough luck some years, but I think we're back in go mode here again now. Molecular modifications of cholesterol metabolism in the liver and the brain after chronic contamination with cesium. So you can't just say, the Radiation Radiation Exposure Compensation Act is just going to look at cancers. Now you're only talking about 1% of the adverse effects, right? I mean, because when you change this on the molecular level, modifications of the metabolism in the liver and the brain, and when you put in the equation the word chronic contamination, oh my goodness. You're supposed to move editors, see? Fit for purpose, I'm not laughing, that's the gallows laugh, by the way. Fit for purpose modeling of radiocesium soil to plant transfer for nuclear emergencies, where they'll say, well, yeah, we had a nuclear emergency, so you're allowed to eat this much now. For goodness sakes, don't do that. Get editor. These people are heartless. They can't get the job if they show any kind of emotions. Like, in order to get a job in the nuclear industry, you bring you into this little room, you got to strangle a kitten and stomp on a puppy. And if you do that, then you can get a job with the nuclear industry. You think I'm kidding, don't you? Well, they don't do it figuratively, but or they don't do it in real life. They do it figuratively to people. You can't get a job as a professor typically unless you're going to cut everybody's throat if there's a call for the government to cover up a nuclear event. 11th Annual Symposium of the Uranium Institute. Because it's like a banana, right? The conditions of the vegetative nervous systems Belarus children after Chernobyl. Discharges of cesium, strontium by the Finnish rivers to the Baltic seas. They've studied everything. Effects of accidents at the Chernobyl atomic plant and the outcome of pregnancies. I got a whole folder in that stuff. Uptake by grasses in natural meadows. Countermeasures. This is another fake study where they say if you tell the farmers to spread potassium and then the plants won't uptake the radiation. This is voodoo science, even on a good day. It's criminal, actually, what it is. But it's not illegal for them to do that. It's not illegal to poison you with radiation, otherwise they couldn't murder you in your hospitals, right? Radiocesium levels in human muscle samples in Greece 1 year after Chernobyl. No, they didn't study much. They don't know much about radiation. They're on the fence. They don't understand very much about it. Self-help countermeasure strategies for populations living in a nuclear wasteland. The best self-help countermeasure strategy, if you're in a population in a nuclear wasteland, is get out of there. You're not going to win that battle, okay? Lifetime accumulation of cesium and strontium, or potassium-40. Why would you put potassium-40 in the equation, though? What the frig is, potassium-40 doesn't come from a nuclear reactor or a nuclear bomb. We all got everything got potassium-40 into it, right? It's meant to confuse you, see? Radioactive impact of Fukushima nuclear accident in the atmosphere. They need to do it to quantify their other lies, is why they do that. Radioactive impact on the atmosphere. You got any idea how many nuclear tests they done in the atmosphere, folks? And those videos of the nuclear tests they done are anything sensitive is redacted. It's enlightening. They're all over the internet, these videos. I got probably 100 plus or something of them. And they were very, very clever even in the 50s and 60s. They understood really well, incredible insight of what to expect when they done the nuclear testing. This is why they done it, which is a nuclear war. You can't do a nuclear testing without radioactive fallout. And if you're touching ground but you can atomize all the particles in the air, you know. So up in the air just is still vicious. The fallout is still going to be vicious. Because the entire inventory, if you got a 25,000 pound bomb, that's 25,000 pounds of radioactive fallout. And it's atomized in aerosol and ionized and radiated. The input of anthropogenic radionuclides into the world oceans. I can talk about that all night long. We're not going to tonight. Radioactive contamination of soils of Georgia. Evaluation of brain functional disorder in Chernobyl patients. Accumulation from Chernobyl fallout nestlings of two-pied flycatcher populations in central Norway. Transfer mechanisms. 256 assessment of the influence of Chernobyl on birth defects, abortion rates. So this has incredible adverse side effects. There's no limit. There really isn't any limit to this. And I can probably go, if I was able to stay wide awake, I can go till at least next week on just this stuff that I got gathered up. And it's just terrifying how many, it affects everything is the problem, right? It breaks my heart constantly. Thyroid cancer in Bulgarian children and adolescents 10 years after Chernobyl. Well, this stuff never goes away. The studies do, the memory does, but the radioactive fallout is never... and that's the problem. We have radioactive fallout forever. It never went away. We have fallout from all the nuclear plants. It never goes away. From all the fuel, and the fuel pool is still splitting atoms. It never goes away. So every day we're adding enormous amounts into the ecosystem from 1,000 fuel pools too. But the nuclear weapons testing was what we're talking about tonight. So I'm trying to stay focused on that as much as I can. A study of hot particles collected in Sweden 1 year after Chernobyl. Hot particles collected in Sweden. I got one! How does that work, I wonder? Hey, come over here, everybody. Should be run. No, come on over here. I got a hot particle. Intellectual development, mental behavioral disorders in children from Belarus. So, if we have all these adverse effects everywhere, why wouldn't you have it at the nuclear test sites? Which is a nuclear war. That's why they had a nuclear war. They call it a nuclear test site because it sounds pretty polite, right? But it's the same nuclear bomb. The radioactive fallout is the exact same. The 137 cesium accumulation by forest-derived products in GOM region. I can't remember where the hell that's to. My apologies. So the biomagnification in the water, the producers, the zooplankton, the small fish, the large fish, the magnification all the way up the food chain of DDT concentrations. Well, radiation's the same thing, right? 137 cesium accumulation by forest-derived products. Influence of agricultural countermeasures in the ratio of different chemical forms of radionuclides in soil solutions. So they studied every facet. I don't think there's nothing they didn't study in the ecosystem because of radiation. Potential for disease initiation by inhaled. So if you live close to the nuclear wasteland within 1,000 miles of a nuclear bomb site, you're breathing this in. Your parents were, your grandparents, and your children, their grandchildren. Radiocesium upland herbage in Colombia, a 3-year field study. So they got 3 years of bringing in the kind, baby. Radiation contamination after Chernobyl nuclear accident, the effects of doses received by the population of Croatia. Dermatosis therapy applied to patients affected by Chernobyl. Chronic radioactive stress on the immune psychology conditions of small mammals. Well, you sterilize all the insects in increments. They stop reproducing in increments because there's so many generations produced each year. And a few decades later, they're gone. They've studied individual doses to radioaccidental releases from fusion reactor, 5-year consequences of internal deposit of radiocesium in Chernobyl in Japan, way back in the day, far, far away. Effects of radioactive iodine on the thyroids of newborns, rats. Disorders and changes in the blood in children in the areas, leading to developmental delays, congenital malformations, mental retardation, infertility. The legacy of Chernobyl, transports of radioisotopes, iodine-131, cesium-134, 137, into cheese and other cheese-making products. There's a lot of farmlands around these nuclear test sites in America, right? That we're talking about in particular tonight. All nuclear dumps, all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms. Total coincidence. Measurements of cesium in Arctic beluga and caribou before and after Fukushima. So they study everything about radiation, don't they? They know how bad it is. And when you look at the consensus, when you put all these studies together and you look at the consensus, they're not studying it because it's harmless. Integrated system of population dose calculations. This is about manipulating you in cases of accidents with air emissions, and all nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation into the ecosystem from the fuel pools. Every year you put more fuel in pools, so there's more radiation produced each year from these disease factories. Integrated system of population dose calculations. No, we don't know one. Cleanup of an urban area contaminated by fallout. You can't clean it up. Like, if you have a nuclear, if you're using the DOLRAM, depleted uranium, low-level radioactive materials in munitions, the criteria for cleaning it up, right, which was Dr. Doug Rookie, was tasked by the Pentagon after the Gulf War to go in and clean up the Dull Ram because they used it on the highway of death, right? And these people were in Mercedes-Benz and stuff like that, loaded up with jewelry from the jewelry shops and the banks, money from the banks. They just went and shut up everything with Dull Ram, depleted uranium munitions, which are not really, they're deadly for a long time. And it's gone because it's gone through chain reactions. Pyrophoric, it catches fire as it goes through the air. And Doug Rourke and his crew went in there, and everybody started breaking out in sores, like huge sores. It was just, they took some of the Humvees back to the United States to try to decommission them in a controlled environment. It couldn't be done, right? It permeates. So the rule of what they were saying was some of the veterans were talking about, like the experts for nuclear, if they find fragments from a Dull Ram shell, they're supposed to put up a fence 900 feet around it if it's in an area they're going to be using. For 900 feet with international signage of danger for radiation and 12-foot high barbed wire fences, basically, to segregate it. But when you shoot the depleted uranium munitions through the air, they're pyrophoric, they catch fire, and so they're releasing the radiation as they're going through the air. It's very insidious. And the industry they don't care. Right? There's no checks and balances, and so it breeds contempt and complacency. Cancers of the thyroid glands in Latvia after Chernobyl, which means everybody's thyroid, if that's showing up, then everybody else is producing huge amounts of radioactive hormones. And then for the children, you're also producing mutated stem cells, radioactive stem cells. So to get children, animals, generations being born producing radioactive hormones and radioactive stem cells. So that population is going to dwindle quite fast. And now we're seeing the effects of 80 years of it. It's catastrophic, right? And we like to see people, though, that worked in the real dangerous stuff back in the day get their compensation. That's why we're doing this video tonight. So you can extrapolate on your own the enormity of the fallout. The radiological exposures of man from radioactivity in the Baltic Sea. Strontium, cesium, plutonium, americium distributions, alpine wetlands in France from, what year is that? 2006. Economic viability, short rotation crops for energy production for reuse of cesium contaminated land. Well, all you're doing is, because the cesium gets sucked up in the plants, so you keep growing food there, then they burn it. Or even worse, they use it. They give it to people to eat. Oh yeah, for energy production, so they're burning it in the incinerators, and then you're just going to liberate the isotopes back into the environment. It's literally the stupidest thing imaginable. Well, every time you have a forest fire around these nuclear test sites, you liberate a huge amount of radiation from those sequestered in there for 40, 50, 60 years back into the ecosystem. You can't destroy it, see? Determination of curium's ratio exposure to discharges from nuclear fuel cycle. Well, the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel is curium isotope. Very unusual to see a study where they acknowledge curium. Just place that over one of my folders there. I can find that one later. Impaired swimming behavior from the sperm of barn swallows. Impaired sperm. Impaired. How's the kids going to look when they get older, I wonder? Concentrations of soil in Hungary from cesium-137. Nuclear safety after 3 Mile Island. Well, this is why we have nuclear sirens around most nuclear plants in North America. Was one of the concessions they made. 3 Mile Island, of course, there was a study where he said, 2 million people got irradiated, but it was equal to watching color television for another year, Dana. And back then, of course, TVs were brutal, and color TV was a pretty novelty back. But still, you can't conflate TV's anthropogenic man-made radiation, because TV you can turn off, for instance. Now, TV wasn't good for you. It sucked your brain right through it, right? The frequency of the TV was set to the same frequency as a young child. That's why you can yell at a child and you can't get them away from TV because it's not their fault, right? Impact of Chernobyl atomic station accident over the state of the cells and immunity in children with tuberculosis. So it destroys their ability to defend against any diseases. Laboratory experiments predict changes in radiocesium root uptakes after flooding events. Incidents of illegal abortion and congenital abnormality in Hungary's external gamma dose rates delivered from Chernobyl follow. Look at all these studies, isn't this something? Down syndrome in Scotland. Down syndrome after Chernobyl. And of course, Belarus and Ukraine was brutal. Emergency planning and nuclear power programs. Well, one of them was to go up and chemtrail the skies over the nuclear site if there was an accident and knock the radiation out of the air, which is what they done after Chernobyl. Schizophrenia and abnormalities in the aftermath of Chernobyl. Oh, there's real mental illnesses, but they want to say it's radiophobia. They want to confuse you by saying, no, it's just radio. No, they got a real illness. And it's really something because, they abandoned the children with the congenital malformations to orphanages where they might have one nurse for 40 Down syndrome children. And they have no budget to take care of the children. And some of the children, when they were asked what would they like, they like a radio or a TV so they had some entertainment. Because the world has forgot about them. The nuclear industry could have resolved that, could have got them all a TV each, but no. They'll donate $1 million to the Boys and Girls Club in their community to lull them into complacency, right? But they won't take care of the victims ever. And what's the point of having the authority or a position to do it and not do it? What's the point? Really, what's the point to be in a position where you can make a difference and not do that? What is that point? That was the point, though. That's why they got the job, so they can actually help all the victims. And I mean, a lot of people have already died off with no remediation whatsoever. Apparent lack of radiation susceptibility among residents of high background radiation areas in Iran. And so this was another one of those scam studies where they're conflating natural stuff with anthropogenic man-made. So yeah, there's more natural radiation in this one spot in Iran, but it's not man-made. So your body equalizes it. It's homeostasis. Your body regulates it like the thermostat regulates the temperature in your house, or the cruise control controls the speed of your car, right? Your body can only handle so much potassium, only so much magnesium, and these stuff are good for you. Your body replenishes naturally through your diet, see? But it won't bioaccumulate natural stuff, and that's why it's not an issue in Iran. But it'll bioaccumulate anthropogenic man-made stuff. And it's a bad way because your body has no defense on the attack of white blood cells. A critical review of measures to reduce radioactive doses from drinking water and consumption of fresh water, foodstuff. Well, you got to move them out of there. You can't reduce it. It's going to be permanent. It's never going to go away. But that's what they do. Oh, well, no. We're going to put potassium in the farmer's field, and you can eat the food. It'll be okay. What's your kid doing? Oh, he's going to university to get a nuclear degree to study your children when they start growing up. Risk of radiation exposure to children and their mothers. They study everything. Radioactivity in the air around nuclear facilities. And a lot of those studies you were shown tonight are to downplay the severity of the truth of the radioactive fallout. Cesium distribution northwest Mediterranean seawater, suspended particles and sediments. Radionuclide transfer to fruit in the International Atomic Energy Agency. A model for radiological consequences of nuclear power plant operation, atmospheric releases. Radiocesium caribou reindeer in northern Canada, Alaska, Greenland, 1958 to 2000. So they're talking about nuclear weapons in that one. They done a study on everything in the ecosystem. There's nothing in the ecosystem they haven't studied many, many times over too. Plutonium, americium, strontium, cesium, soils around nuclear research centers. And then cesium, plutonium, americium, and boreal forest soil into wild mushrooms and berries. You know, the bears will eat 200,000 berries a day and end up getting leukemia, right? Oh, they're emaciated because there's no salmon. No, they're emaciated because 90% of their diet is grub and berries and stuff like that. And they're bioaccumulating radiation. They got leukemia. Radioactive contamination of wild mushrooms, a cross-cultural risk perception study. They just make stuff up just so they can study it. Wow, nobody's ever studied that before for radiation. I bet you I can get money for that study. They're right, too. They will. They study anthropogenic man-made radiation more than the natural solar system elements by orders of magnitudes. There's just endless money for those studies. Transfer of cesium from... And if you took just 1% to 1% of what they've done on these studies and paid it to the compensation victims, we wouldn't have a problem, would we? They give all the money to the scientists to study the victims and tell them they're not victims. Rather than just be done with it, take care of them. The Atlas of cesium disposition on Europe after Chernobyl. Foliage absorption and leaf fruit transfer of cesium in fruit trees. Yeah, they don't know nothing about radiation. They're totally in the dark about it. It's still a mystery science, Dana. No, it's not. Doses from radiocesium and potassium-40 found in tobacco leaves and cigarettes. Well, your body regulates potassium. It's completely harmless and innocuous and benign. You acclimate it to it through genetic superior selection, right? It's completely harmless. Unlike the anthropogenic man-made, though. There's not solid cancers after therapeutic radiation. I'm not going to do it tonight, but I got folders there of radiation therapy, and you don't want to see it because you're going to have nightmares for days after you see what happens. And their contempt, for the victims. You see, the World Health Organization was already crazy. The Japanese government raised their limits for children to get iodate pills 75 times higher than the crazies already had raised it. So denying the victims, let them get sick and die, and then there's no one to complain down the road for the next generation when their children graduate from nuclear college, right? Plutonium in wildlife and soil of Maralinga legacy sites. Yeah, last year we covered a week of stories about Maralinga where they discovered that it was incredibly radioactive there, which is a big tourist destination, see? And so they said, okay, well, you can only spend an hour there. So the tourist operators are going to have to go from spending all day lingering out there, and the whole story is just so sad. Because they knew the difference, right? All these studies prove they know the difference. Human bones obtained from routine joint replacement surgery as a tool for studying plutonium, americium, strontium, body burden in the general public. Like, you get the gallows laugh because, what Australia, after the British nuclear testing in Australia, done a secret study on children. They took the femurs and some joints or some bones out of children that had died. They didn't tell the parents. There's something like 22,000 or 28,000 children where they actually stole parts of the children to study a collective study on foliage. They were looking for strontium-90, and they found it in all the children. And then the story came out, it got leaked out that they were doing that, and then the nuclear industry in Australia is just, they're completely out of control. Their contempt for everybody is it's them in the Mineral Council is really shocking. Plutonium bioaccumulation in seabirds. What seabirds? I can't remember the last time we said a seabird. The migratory species have been almost wiped out now. Plutonium concentrations and plutonium, and I never see no birds today. I did hear some songbirds though, most likely seed eaters in the woods, but I didn't physically see any. Plutonium concentrations and 240 plutonium, 239 plutonium atom ratio and biota collected from Manchukuo Island, Alaska. I mean, what? They never done a lot of tests up there, Alaska, but they were a big test. And we covered them years ago here, right? Plutonium 137, cesium, uranium isotopes, Mongolia, surface soil. And this was from radioactive fallout from nuclear testing. Global fallout. Global fallout. Just bear with me. I'm waiting for the computer to... Well, the operating system. I have an operating system, right? Because I use a TriCaster. So it's not... It's a computer, though, in some ways. You can't put something on it, like another program or something. These are dedicated systems. These very, very... just wait. I should have cut up by now. I'm going to put it in auto mode. Hopefully. Okay, no audio? Okay, I know audio. Mic check, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6. Ye giddy up and doggy. We got sound now. Yeah, I can hear it now on my own end. We're good. Sorry about that, folks. Have you got sound yet? I screwed up and never turned the sound back on, eh? Yeah, we got sound. Got it? Okay, good stuff. Let's do it. Yeah, they booted me off and they shut my computer down and the internet. I got a pretty good firewall, but so I had to reboot the internet. I had to reboot the computer, not the computer, but the operating system. Like anybody's clever enough to do that to me, they know I'm using the TriCaster, right? They can tell by the IP because these things are registered, like a car is registered. The TriCasters are registered too, right? And so they're all over me anyway. So I'm just going to flash through some more of this stuff. We got some videos and pictures from... I put together just a short montage of the last 4 days. I spent 3 days working on the trailer. We were rained out, heavy rain Friday, Saturday, yesterday. And I had to change my clothes, everything, socks included, underwear, everything, twice each day. And I was itching to get to work, right? Okay, so there's all kinds of studies for the radiation fallout, and radioactive fallout is radioactive fallout no matter where it happens. And so anybody's watching this later on, there's only this little, they don't really understand the bigger picture until we got kicked, the computer crashed and the internet was gone. And so that was an attack. They didn't want to, they wanted to drive whoever was watching it away because they're watching the IP addresses. And they'll come back and watch the video, or they already get the logistics of the importance of the story tonight, right? And so all of these studies are on Fukushima you're looking at now. And I'm not going to try to go through everything. We're going to get the pictures in a minute. Calm down, Charlie, doing his best, yeah. Thanks, James. You're great too, you know you are. And I mean, they took down the internet. They took down the router and my system. And folks, everybody knows how long I've been doing this. I've been doing this for this show here. We've been doing for almost 13 years straight, right? So, and we do the research 4 to 5 months a year, typically on the ocean. The last couple of years I've been pretty sick, but we're back in conditions again. So when you start looking at all of these different studies, I can flash them all for you. You can read them later, but I can't go through them all because it'll take hours and hours and hours and hours. But they study everything is what you're looking at, right? They're studying every facet of the ecosystem, every facet of everything, right? They've studied it all. And they're doing it everywhere. Every country's doing the same thing. It's 100% cult. That's what nuclear is. And it basically brainwashed a lot of the senators and Congress people with bananas and potato chips and walking in the sunshine. And the people that are able to make a difference, are in a position to make a difference, this is one of those times where they should exercise that right. And the radiation compensation for the victims is a good thing, right? Radiation exposure causes all kinds of incredible diseases and illnesses, heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory. And so you can't just look at cancer. And so when you look at what the scientists are doing, they're not just looking at cancer. They're looking at the entire ecosystem, right? And the enormity of the studies and the volume of the amount of monetary necessary to produce these studies is itself, right, a testament to the harm that this stuff is caused and will continue to cause. They were studying 90 strontium. They were going around to the dead or abandoned cattle and pulling the teeth out to study them. They're maniacs, but radiocesium interaction with clay minerals. They know everything. There is no, in the academic community, they don't pretend that they don't know. They know. I can show you so many studies, your mind will just split in two. And I was debating whether I should come back and just at the end of it because I couldn't get anything to work. And I was like, no, I'm just going to keep going until it gets connected. I don't care how long it takes it because people can always watch the video tomorrow, see? Because as long as I don't end it on my end, then I can join back into the stream. So I can close down my operating system that I'm using, right? And get up tomorrow morning, as long as I don't end the stream, and pick right back up where I left off. And chat room will stay going the whole time, you know? Years ago, we used to do it sometimes. Like I would get up in the morning and do a stream, and then if I was going out on the ocean when I was up in BC, and I was going to be back that evening, I might just let the conversation go all day long and then join the stream again that evening and finish off the show. And they allude to so much ambient dose rates induced by radiocesium in the environment. And so they like using certain words to to not make it so salacious, but that's the words. The salacious words are the words they should be using, right? Not giving this the respect to show the harm and the danger these attributes have. Whenever you see potassium 40 in a study, those people should probably get 10, 15 years in jail for doing that. Because the idea is to manipulate somebody or some groups of people or some policymakers or investors or something like that. Sewage sludge, radioactive sewage sludge. Well, Japan, they can't get rid of the sewage. They can't get rid of the sludge. And one of the dirty things they're doing, of course, is evaporating the water and the liquids out of it, which is going to be incredibly radioactive. And then the sludge is like a sand almost, right? And then they store it, like the numbers we're talking about, for the water reclamation facilities, for water filtration facilities, where the water sediment collected for the water filtration is so radioactive, you're talking about 50,000 one-ton bags in a couple of big metropolitan areas. That's too radioactive. They want a TIPCO to take it because it's so radioactive. The sediment from the water filtration systems, which means the water filtration systems, the water pipes rather, are going to be incredibly radioactive. And the filtration systems now is completely useless because it's radioactive. On a high level too, because of the bioaccumulation in the filters. Nuclear accident-derived tritium-3H. Very unusual to see the 3H, isn't it? In river water, which is, because there's different. There's tritium from the solar system, but then there's tritium-3H, which is the anthropogenic man-made tritium. They like to name things equal to something in nature to confuse those people. Oh, well, no, it's harmless. It's like bananas. When it's simply, you can't conflate them, see? Observation of fallout in Great Britain. So when you think about nuclear bombs, this is what we're talking about tonight. You think about all the testing they've done. You think about, they told people, some communities where the wind blew back on them with a heavy doses, they evacuated them, and then they gave them $5 or $10 as restitution for evacuating them. Because they only let them evacuate for a couple of days and said, okay, you go back. But once the radioactive plume comes through, you don't want to have your loved ones. There's 15 times more breast cancer, or 6 times more breast cancer within 15 miles of a nuclear power plant. And if you got a bunch of daughters, would you want to live there, close by, for instance? Of course not. But imagine the issues that's going to cause with the species that don't have the luxury of moving, right? The birds, the mammals, the animals. Imagine the implications of that. And then when you look at all these studies, and like you say, I'm just going to flash through a few dozens, and we're going to go watch some videos from the weekend and today. And anybody wants to come back and kind of comprehend the significance of all these studies is that they've studied everything. They know it's bad because they've studied every facet of the ecosystem. So when the nuclear bombs were originally set off, the Manhattan Project emissions and stuff like that, Radiation Compensation Control or Exposure Compensation Act should include everybody downriver of all nuclear bomb testing and nuclear plants. It should include everybody down Columbian River, because Hanford dumped 450 billion gallons of the Cold War radiation, high-level radiation, directly into the soil, which is right alongside of the Columbia River. And so 450 billion gallons, a lot of people just, that don't mean nothing, right? So when you calculate it out in the 6 feet wide, say 6 foot wide aquarium, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet, more than once, of high level, like by the liter, incredible lethal levels by the liter, walking past this stuff, dumped into the soil. All the national laboratories, anybody within 50 or 100 miles of them will have heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory. They've contaminated all the aquifers, all of them, under these national laboratories. The national laboratories were all built on these aquifers on purpose in case of a nuclear meltdown. And they had so many nuclear meltdowns at the national laboratories, like Los Alamos National Laboratory, for instance. The Brookhaven has contaminated all the water. Everybody, they're like the worst neighbors anybody's ever had. What Hanford done is completely unacceptable. To dump so much into the Columbia River. The original first 10 years, the Manhattan Project, they had all these scientists, and they're working on something new. It's very secretive, and you got to live on these little communities we're building. And they had spies spying on all the scientists and everybody. They would only hire illiterate garbage men and maintenance people that were going around doing basic stuff, right? Because they were less likely to be able to understand what was going on. And then the scientists, for every scientist, they had a spy. It turns out, though, now, they had a spy spying on the spy, spying on the scientists, but apparently it was even worse than that. It was a lot of redundancy. Spies spying on the spies, spying on the spies, spying on the spy, on the scientists. And so that secrecy, this enormous amount of money, it had to be secret, otherwise it would have been uncovered. So that never stopped. They're still doing that today. And they'll make stuff up to justify their existence if they got to, false flags. And everybody in the country should be equal to some kind of restitution from the nuclear industry. The nuclear industry at some point is going to have to own up. And we have run out of options. It's time to own up. And so when you look at land contamination activities, around all the nuclear test sites, they should have picked up 1 billion one-ton bags of topsoil just to try to contain some of the radioactive fallout from being liberated back into the environment, right? They didn't do that. And when you look at all the studies, there's no maybes about it. There's no perhapses. Okay, so we're just going to stop there. We're not going to make it through the rest. And because I'm pretty hardcore, I might go for another hour and not realize it. So I'm going to take you down. That's the end of the show, basically. We got some pictures and stuff from the day that we're going to... So you remember that picture from last show? That's the back of the Zodiac. That disaster. So those 3 pictures, you remember those probably. Let me go to this picture. Let me see if I can get this to work in my favor. It'll take a bit of a minute here to get this to work, so just bear with me. I'll just let this thing... Hi, everybody. False flag at half staff. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? How's the poll going? We got 44 votes. Was detonating 1,000 nuclear weapons that were designated a test have the same radioactive fallout as a nuclear war? Well, yes, it does, Dana. Somebody said no, but obviously it does, right? We're just waiting for the system. We might have to do wait anyway, because once I forgot this, I started that process. It could take 30 seconds for that to... Because what it is, I got so much collected. And what it is, I just got to do a big dump on my system too. You do that usually every 6 months or something like that. But I don't like to move anything out of a spot where I can find it. That's okay. Let's try this for a few minutes. we'll let the system catch up because I'm just having a few problems here tonight. A lot of problems tonight. We got kicked offline. Got kicked offline. Had the computer, the whole operating system freeze up on me. A few other things I'm not going to say because the industry's paying attention. What are you going to do with these people? Can't take them anywhere. Let's try to poll again. Was detonating 1,000 nuclear weapons, radioactive fallout, the same as the nuclear war? Well, I mean, clearly that's a nuclear war, isn't it? Yeah, that sucks. There we go. I just got to get back on my